Donald, your role is stable. Compensation reflects that. It was 9:10 in the morning when she said it. I remember the exact time because I looked at the wall clock the moment the words landed. Something about hearing the same rejection for the third year in a row makes you pay attention to minor details. We were sitting in one of those glass-walled conference rooms. Clean table, neutral chairs, everything designed to feel calm, controlled like nothing of importance ever really happens in those rooms. Across from me sat Laura Jenkins from Human Resources. She had a calm voice and perfect posture. To her right was Oliver Davis, my manager. Oliver was in his early 30s, had a Master of Business Administration, and wore a sharp suit. He was the kind of guy who speaks well in meetings but never stays long enough to fix anything. He did not look at me when she said it. That part stayed with me more than the words, "Your role is stable." I had been hearing that phrase for 3 years straight. Stable. Like the logistics systems I kept running, were not holding together shipping contracts worth millions of dollars. Like the warehouse managers calling my phone at midnight did not exist. Like stability was something simple, something anyone could maintain. Pinnacle Logistics was a high-volume fulfillment and warehousing company, handling inventory dispatch for mid-sized manufacturers. We operated 3 regional distribution centers, and our systems coordinated over 50,000 shipments every single week. My job as the senior operations manager was to keep those systems talking to each other. The core of our business relied on the electronic data interchange feeds, the warehouse management database, and the client's enterprise resource planning systems. If those databases drifted out of sync, orders would be duplicated, shipments would go to the wrong addresses, and the company would face severe financial penalties. I had spent 13 years building the digital bridges that kept those platforms aligned. When I started, my salary was $55,000 a year. Over the years, through hard work, it had grown to $85,000. But for the last 3 years, my pay had been completely frozen. Meanwhile, our shipment volume had doubled, and my responsibilities had tripled. Laura slid a paper across the table. My current salary was printed in clean black ink. It was the same number as last year and the same number as the year before that. No adjustment, no acknowledgement, just confirmation of stagnation. We reviewed regional market data, she continued, and based on your current position, this is aligned. Aligned. I almost nodded. That is the strange part of these meetings. You sit there and for a second you almost agree with them. The tone is so calm, so confident, like the decision was made somewhere far above you, long before you walked into the room. I leaned back slightly in my chair, not defensive, just steady. I have taken on more responsibility, I said. System integration, client escalation, weekend coverage. Oliver finally spoke. And we appreciate that, Donald. We really do. He still was not looking at me, instead focusing on his expensive watch. But compensation is not just about workload, he added. It is about structure. Structure. That word again. I had heard every version of this conversation. Budget, structure, timing, alignment. Different words, same outcome. No raise. I sat there for a few seconds, not arguing, not pushing, just letting it settle. Because at some point you stop trying to convince people who have already decided. My name is Donald Fletcher. I am 47 years old, and I knew every single database query and network port in our operations. I was the guy people called when database syncs failed. The one who stayed late when everyone else went home. Stable. That is what they called it. Laura closed the folder on the desk. We can revisit this next year. Next year. I almost smiled at that. 3 years in a row, and somehow next year always sounded like a real possibility when they said it. Oliver finally looked up, just for a second. We want you to stay, Donald. You are important to the team. Important. Not valuable, not critical, just important. I nodded once, slow, controlled. Understood, I said. No argument, no emotion. There is a point where you realize the conversation is not about numbers anymore. It is about how they see you, and how they do not. I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and thanked them for their time. Polite, professional, exactly the way they expect someone like me to respond. That is the role, too. Not just fixing systems, but managing their perception. As I walked out of the room, I caught my reflection in the glass. Same posture, same calm face. You would not know anything had just shifted, but it had, because that was not just a denial. It was a decision. Not about salary, but about value. And the moment you understand how a company values you, everything after that starts to look different. I did not go back to my desk right away. I just stood there for a second in the hallway. Quiet, still, and for the first time in a long time, I stopped thinking about what I needed to prove and started thinking about what they were willing to lose. By the time I got back to my desk, nothing had changed on the surface. Same screens, same dashboards, same quiet hum of systems running in the background. From the outside, my job looked simple and stable, that word again. But what they called stable was actually something else entirely. It was controlled risk. Every system I managed carried revenue through it. Orders, shipments, client data, billing triggers. If something failed, it did not just stop work. It stopped money. And most of the time, no one noticed how close things came to breaking. That was my job. Not to fix problems, but to prevent them from ever being seen. I sat down and pulled up the main operations dashboard. Everything was green, clean, normal. But I knew better. There were always small delays, timing mismatches, data queues building quietly in the background. Nothing big enough to trigger alerts yet, but enough to become a major issue if ignored. I opened a secondary panel, then a third. That was where the real work was. The part no one wrote into job descriptions. I had built most of those monitoring layers myself over the years. Simple tools, nothing fancy, just custom SQL queries and shell scripts to see what others could not. I ran these scripts on my personal laptop, which I brought to work every day, because the official systems only showed you what had already failed. I focused on what was about to fail. Around 11:30, my phone buzzed. Client escalation from Summit Transport, our largest account. They were seeing delays in processing. Nothing critical yet, but enough to raise concern. I answered on the second ring. Donald here. Relief on the other end. You could hear it immediately. Hey Donald, we have got some inconsistencies in yesterday's batch. I will take a look, I said. No meeting, no ticket, no escalation chain, just me. That is how it usually worked. I pulled their data while still on the call, traced the issue back to a timing offset in one of the internal processes. Small thing. Easy to miss if you did not know where to look. Give me 10 minutes, I told them. I fixed it in 7 minutes. By the time we hung up, everything was back to normal. No report, no record, no one else even knew it happened. That was the pattern. Every day, problems solved before they reached the surface. Systems held together by decisions no one saw. And above me, presentations. Oliver was good at those. He knew how to speak in clean sentences, using clear slides and simple narratives. Efficiency improved, performance stable, operational strength. I had seen those decks. Sometimes I even recognized my own work in them, just not my name. Around mid-afternoon, I passed by one of the conference rooms. Oliver was inside, presenting to senior leadership. I had no reason to go inside. I already knew what was being said. Metrics, growth, stability. All true, just incomplete, because none of it explained how close things came to breaking or who kept them from getting there. That part did not fit into slides, and over time, I stopped trying to make it fit. It was not bitterness, it was clarity. I knew what I did, I knew what the systems needed, and I knew what would happen if that understanding disappeared. Not immediately, but eventually. That is the thing about systems like ours. They do not fail all at once, they drift. Small gaps, tiny delays, minor errors, until one day those small things connect, and then everything feels sudden, but never is. To make matters more complicated, Oliver had recently hired a junior analyst named Jason Croft. Jason was 26 years old, had a fresh Master of Business Administration, and wore a smartwatch that buzzed constantly with notifications. Oliver liked him immediately, put him in meetings early, and let him present operational metrics to the executives. Jason was great at explaining dashboards, but he did not know how to read a database execution plan or debug a system deadlock. I had spent 6 months training him, showing him the basic workflows, but he only cared about the surface numbers. He took credit for the stability my scripts provided, describing our back-end operations as a clean, automated machine that required no manual intervention. Oliver believed him, assuming that anyone with a basic technical background could run our operations. After the glass room meeting, my perspective shifted. I decided to stop covering up the structural issues. I would do my job exactly as it was written, but nothing more. On Tuesday morning, a timing delay occurred in the database sync. Usually, I would have logged in at 6 in the morning and patched the lock process. This time, I waited. I let the process run, let the issue surface the way it was designed to occur. By 9:30, the delay was visible. The shipping dashboard showed a backlog of 4,000 orders. Jason panicked, running around the office, while Oliver frantically called my desk. I calmly explained that debugging database sync issues was an engineering task that fell outside my administrative scope. I submitted a standard support ticket and waited for it to be routed. Oliver was forced to pay $5,000 in expedited shipping fees to meet the client's deadline. They felt the friction, and I began preparing for my next move. The first time they told me to wait, it sounded reasonable. That was 3 years before that meeting. Back then, the company had just come out of a restructuring phase. Budgets were tight, departments were shifting, everyone was adjusting. So when I asked for a raise, they did not say no. They said, "Not right now. Let us revisit this next cycle, Donald. You are in a strong position." That is what Oliver told me at the time, and I believed him because at that point, I still thought the system worked the way it was designed. So, I waited. And while I waited, I kept doing what I had always done. Late nights, weekend coverage, fixing things before they escalated, helping new hires understand systems that did not make sense on paper. A year later, things looked different. The company was doing better, revenue was up, and clients were expanding contracts. More pressure, more complexity, more work, and somehow more distance between what I did and what was visible. Jason was leading presentations now, standing in front of leadership, walking through performance metrics. Sometimes I sat in those meetings, and sometimes I did not. But either way, I knew exactly how those numbers were generated. I had built the monitoring layers. I had stabilized the processes. I had resolved the failures that no one else ever mentioned. And then I would watch him explain it like it was clean, predictable, and controlled. Oliver would stand next to him, nodding and smiling, bragging to the vice presidents about how they had streamlined the operations department. I had to sit in the back of the room, listening to them take credit for the quiet weekends I spent resolving database locks. Jason was always looking at his phone, asking questions only to write down the answers for his slides, never actually trying to understand the database structure. I tried to show him how to parse the XML logs from our European shipping partners, but he shrugged it off, saying the automated dashboard would handle it. He was convinced that logistics was just a matter of running pre-made reports. Meanwhile, our largest client, Summit Transport, was expanding their fleet to 300 trucks. Their operations director, Gordon Boyd, was a direct, practical man who had worked in logistics for 30 years. Gordon did not care about slides. He cared about delivery times. He knew my worth because I had personally saved Summit's holiday deliveries when our servers crashed on Christmas Eve. Spending 12 hours rebuilding the indexed tables, the second time I asked for a raise, I was more direct. Same room, same tone, different reason. This year, we are aligning roles more tightly, HR said. We want to make sure titles and compensation evolve together. Another delay, another way of saying not yet. Oliver added, "We are also looking at expanding leadership pathways. There could be opportunities for you there." Opportunities, future, possibility. All words that sound like progress but do not actually change anything. I walked out of that meeting the same way I walked out of the last one. Calm, professional, still doing my job, still carrying the same weight. And somewhere in the middle of that year, something changed. Not outside, but inside. I realized I was not being overlooked. I was being used exactly where I was, reliable, consistent, predictable. That is what made me valuable, and that is what kept me where I was. By the third year, the conversation was not even surprising. Different words, same outcome, and sitting there in that glass room, hearing your role is stable again. I understood they had already decided no. During the next 2 weeks of my notice period, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia and resolve. I had spent 13 years in this building, and I had a lot of memories in these hallways, but the corporate landscape had become too cold and metrics-driven. I knew that the people who actually built the company were being pushed aside for young managers who did not understand the work. The offer from Gordon Boyd was my ticket out. Summit Transport was implementing a new state-of-the-art warehouse management system that had to integrate with their automated tracking systems, and they needed a senior architect's systems. Gordon told me that I would have a budget to hire 2 junior database administrators and select my own tools, which was a level of trust I had never received at Pinnacle Logistics. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon. My personal phone rang, showing an unknown number. I answered and heard Gordon Boyd's voice. "Donald," he said, "I am going to be direct. We are building an internal operations team to handle our new automated routing, and your name is the only one I trust. We want you to lead our logistics systems." He offered me a senior role with complete autonomy. The compensation was $140,000 a year, with full benefits and guaranteed bonuses. It was nearly double what I was making at Pinnacle, and it came without the corporate bureaucracy. I told him I would need a day to think about it. "Take your time," Gordon replied, "but I need an answer soon." I sat at my desk and looked at the green dashboard. The decision was already made. It was just a matter of timing. I submitted my resignation the following morning. I gave a standard 2-week notice in a polite, professional email. Oliver Davis walked over to my desk a few minutes later, holding a printout of the message. "You are serious about this, Donald?" he asked, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Yes," I replied. "I have accepted another opportunity." He nodded slowly. "Where are you going?" "I will share the details after my transition is complete," I said. He did not push. "Okay," he said, "we will make the transition smooth." Smooth. That word again. There was no counteroffer, no request to stay, no discussion of my value. HR scheduled an exit meeting within hours. Laura Jenkins thanked me for my 13 years of service with a generic template email. "We will ensure a clean transition," she said. I almost smiled at that. They thought my role was a simple checklist that could be handed over in a document. I spent my final 2 weeks doing exactly what was expected. I documented our standard operational procedures, system access points, and routing guides. I sat with Jason Croft, answering his questions and walking him through the basic dashboards. He was highly confident, convinced that managing the systems was just a matter of clicking the right buttons. But I did not share the source code of my custom cleanup scripts, nor did I transfer the API keys I had generated on my personal laptop. Those scripts ran locally on my machine, cleaning up sync errors before they could corrupt the database. That was my proprietary work, created on my own time. On my last Friday, there was no farewell lunch or speech. I packed my toolbox, closed my computer, and walked out of the building on time. The problems began 3 days after I left. Without my custom scripts running to clean up the data mismatches, the database tables started to drift. On Monday morning, I received a text message from a junior coordinator on the operations floor. "Are you still reachable, Donald?" I waited an hour before responding. "What is up?" "We are seeing some delays in batch processing," he wrote. "Nothing major, just different." I knew exactly what was happening. The synchronizations were lagging, causing orders to queue up. "Have you checked the sync intervals?" I asked. "Yeah, looks fine," he replied. On the surface, the dashboard still looked green, but underneath, the database was corrupting. I told him to keep monitoring it. I had no reason to do so. Over the next few days, the errors stacked up. Shipping labels began printing with blank addresses. Warehouse workers could not find inventory because the database records did not match physical locations. The electronic data interchange feeds from Summit Transport used custom XML schemas that my personal scripts parsed and cleaned. When those scripts stopped running, the database received malformed XML data containing special characters, which caused the parser to fail. This led to a backlog of 5,000 records in the transaction queue. The transaction queue deadlock was caused by a table lock on the shipping manifest database. Jason tried to resolve it by writing a raw SQL update query that lacked a where clause, which accidentally marked 3,000 shipments as delivered in the database when they had not even been loaded. This caused the customer portal to send automated delivery notifications to clients, who then called in panic, asking where their cargo was. Oliver Davis was in a complete panic, shouting at Jason, while Jason was desperately searching online forums for how to recover from an accidental table update. By midweek, the database corruption caused a massive double allocation of trucks. Pinnacle's systems sent two different drivers to pick up the same cargo at our northern warehouse, while other shipments sat stranded with no trucks assigned. Summit Transport's drivers were sitting idle at the loading docks for 5 hours, unable to obtain their shipping manifests. The drivers were furious, complaining to their dispatchers about the waste of fuel and time. Gordon Boyd had to pay them layover fees out of Summit's own pocket, which made him even more determined to sever ties with Pinnacle. Because of this chaos, Gordon Boyd immediately pulled 20% of Summit's shipping volume from Pinnacle, transferring the contracts to a competitor. Other major clients followed, and within 10 days, Pinnacle's overall revenue from key accounts dropped by 40%. Oliver and Jason frantically tried to resolve the crisis by rebooting the servers, which only corrupted the active database transaction logs because they did not know how to run a proper rollback query. I got the call late Friday evening. The caller identification showed Walter Henderson, the Senior Vice President of Operations. "Donald, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense and strained. He explained they were seeing major issues on the operations side and wanted me to return as an advisor. "We can be flexible," he added. "Remote advisory, whatever works for you. Compensation will not be an issue." "I am going to be direct, Walter," I replied. "You had 3 years to adjust my compensation when I was preventing these problems. You chose to do nothing. That was your decision." Walter's tone shifted, becoming aggressive. "We are looking at our options, Donald. The sudden failure of these systems right after you left looks like sabotage. Our legal department is preparing a suit for breach of fiduciary duty and tortious interference." I did not flinch. "I will have my attorney contact you, Walter," I said, and hung up. On Monday morning, my lawyer sent a formal response to Pinnacle Logistics. The letter was a masterpiece of legal positioning, utilizing multiple doctrines to dismantle their threats. First, my attorney demolished the sabotage claim. He documented that I was an at-will employee who had provided a standard 2-week notice, fully cooperated with the transition, and documented all standard workflows. As an at-will worker who had resigned, I owed no ongoing fiduciary duty to the company. Second, he cited the Fair Labor Standards Act. He established that Pinnacle had misclassified my position as exempt to avoid paying overtime. The administrative exemption under the Fair Labor Standards Act requires that the employee's primary duty must be the performance of office or non-manual work directly related to management or general business operations, and must include the exercise of discretion and independent judgment. However, my daily activities were primarily technical support, database debugging, and running manual scripts, which are classified as non-exempt technical labor. Because I was misclassified, the company owed me back wages for the 15 hours of overtime I worked every week for the past 3 years. This was calculated at time and a half of my hourly rate of $41, totaling $95,000 plus an equal amount in liquidated damages. Third, the letter addressed my custom scripts. My attorney cited the work-made-for-hire doctrine, proving that these database cleanup tools were created on my personal laptop outside work hours and without using company resources. Under the work-made-for-hire doctrine, copyright ownership belongs to the employer only if the work is created within the scope of employment. Since these scripts were developed at home, outside my standard hours, and were not part of my official job description, I retained the copyright. If Pinnacle continued to run my scripts to resolve their sync issues, they would be liable for active copyright infringement. Finally, my lawyer delivered the decisive blow, citing the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. He warned that if Pinnacle initiated litigation, we would demand a full forensic audit of their operations. This audit would reveal that Oliver Davis and the Chief Financial Officer had certified annual compliance reports under Section 404, claiming they possessed robust internal controls. In reality, their entire shipping operation was completely dependent on an undocumented personal script that was never audited. Making false compliance certifications carried severe federal criminal penalties for the executives. Pinnacle's legal department read the letter and realized they had no case. If they went to court, they would lose the overtime dispute, face massive copyright statutory damages, and potentially trigger a federal investigation that could ruin the executives. During the negotiation, Pinnacle's general counsel tried to argue that my overtime was voluntary. But my lawyer countered that under the law, all hours worked with the company's knowledge must be paid. Since my managers received emails from me at midnight, they knew I was working. My lawyer made it clear that we would file a formal complaint with the Department of Labor if they did not settle, which would prompt an audit of the entire operations department. Within 48 hours, they contacted my lawyer with a settlement offer. They dropped all threats of litigation, agreed to pay me $90,000 to settle the unpaid overtime claims, and purchased a 90-day license for my scripts for an additional $40,000. In return, they required a complete mutual release. Walter Henderson signed the agreement himself, his voice quiet and defeated when he called my lawyer to finalize the deal. I signed the paperwork, deposited the checks, and focused on my new career at Summit Transport. At Summit, the atmosphere was completely different. The executives respected technical expertise, and my weekly meetings with Gordon Boyd were focused on logical solutions rather than corporate buzzwords. I had my own team, my own budget, and actual respect. The systems at Pinnacle were eventually rebuilt by an outside IT consulting firm. The firm brought in a team of 4 database engineers to replicate the database synchronization that I had managed alone. They spent 3 months analyzing logs, mapping database relationships, and writing new integration scripts. Pinnacle paid them $300,000 for the project, which was far more than the raise I had requested over 3 years. It was a clear demonstration that the company would rather spend 6 times the amount on outside contractors than pay their own experienced staff what they were worth. Oliver Davis was quietly demoted to a low-level administrative position where he spent his days compiling reports that other analysts double-checked. His office was moved to a small room in the basement, far from executive visibility. He no longer attended the high-level strategy meetings or presented slides to the board. The expensive watch he loved to look at was now just a reminder of the time he wasted, trying to optimize away the people who kept the business alive. Jason Croft was reassigned to a basic data entry role where he could not touch any database systems. I did not feel vindictive, just validated. Work has value, understanding has value, and if the place you are in does not recognize it, the market eventually will. You do not have to fight them forever. Sometimes you just have to let the system run without you, and let the results speak for themselves.